Okay, so today we're starting on Psachim Kuf Aleph, Amud Aleph. And we're actually starting at the bottom of Kuf Amud Bet, right at the very end. We started doing it yesterday, dealing with it. We are dealing with the big issue of Otam Bnei Adam Shekitshu Bebet Knesset. Those people that say Kiddush in shul on a Friday night, which is still the minhag in a lot of places. A lot of places do this. I know one of my earliest memories was going to shul and having to drink the wine after the chazan had made kiddush, as the children all came up in a row when we were given the wine, and it was all. It's one of the earliest memories and one of my nicest memories. And this is basically a sugya which is talking about that issue. What is that for, and why can you do it, and why do people not do it today? And it all comes down to this: Otam bnei adam shekitshu bebeit knesset. Those particular people, there's a dispute between two rabbanim. These are the two first rabbanim who set up yeshivot in Bavel, the earliest Amoraim, Rav and Shmuel. And they were in Bavel, and they were in the first generation, and they had two opinions. Amar Rav says, Yedei yain lo yatsu, Yedei kiddush yatsu. What that means is that they've made a bracha. They make two brachot in shul. There's one bracha for the wine, and there's one bracha for the day of Shabbat. You say Borei Pri Hagafen for the wine. You say Mekadesh Shabbat for Shabbat. Now those two brachot have got consequences. If you say Mekadesh Shabbat, it means you have done the mitzvah of Kiddush of Shabbat. You've made the Shabbat holy. You have actually declared it to be kadosh. That's when you say Mekadesh Shabbat. Rav is saying you have actually managed to do that by doing that in shul. You don't need to do that at home. But not only that, by saying Brei Pri Hagafen, you've actually said, right, now you don't need to drink wine at home. You don't need to say the bracha over wine at home. When you go home and have wine, you've already made the bracha. So Rav says, Rav says you have not made the bracha over wine. That's what Shmuel says. Rav says that you have not made the bracha over the wine. When you go home, you have to make the bracha over wine again. But about Kiddush, you have made the bracha. Whereas Shmuel says, Af yedei Kiddush lo yatsu. So in fact, he hasn't made a bracha over anything. He's got to go home. He's got to say Brei Pri Hagafen again, but he also has to say Mekadesh Shabbat again. It's not good doing it in shul. It doesn't help. You're not doing kiddush and you're not doing the wine, right? Obvious question is, right? Why would Shmuel do it in shul at all? We'll come to that in a second. Before I go on, though, I want to mention there is a third opinion, which is brought. And that is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, this opinion we only see much later, but I'm bringing it now just to let you know that this is the same argument. Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion is that, in fact, the other way around. When you say the bracha in shul, it's both kiddush for Shabbat and also for the wine. We'll come to him later. He was at the same time as Rav and Shmuel, only he lived in Israel. He didn't live in Bavel. And we're going to talk about Rabbi Yochanan afterwards. I'm leaving him up there because he's a first generation Amorah, but he's not actually relevant yet. Now we're going to come back to Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel, there's an argument for both of them. If you say like Rav, okay, and this is what the Gemara says in the beginning of Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph. Elala Rav, according to Rav, Lama Leli Kedushay B'Veitei. If what Rav is saying that you have, once you've made Kiddush in shul, you have now you've been fulfilled your mitzvah of making Kiddush, why make Kiddush at home at all? And so the answer to that is, it's not for him himself when he goes home to make Kiddush, and it usually is a him, but when he goes home to make Kiddush at home, it's not for himself, he's doing it for his wife and kids at home. That's the opinion of Rav. Shmuel, on the other hand, you've got another question. This is the question that's more obvious than anything. If you're not going to be if there's no point in doing it because it's also not for the wine and also not for the kiddush, why lama li lekidushe beit knista? Why would you make it at all, even in the Beit Knesset? Why do you make kiddush in the Beit Knesset if it does absolutely no good? He goes, because the shul isn't just a shul for davening in; it's a community center. There's always guests, and the guests may well be eating on the premises. And those guests that come, you want to make Kiddush for them. So therefore, in order to make sure that they're okay, the Chazan makes Kiddush on Friday night for the guests who are going to be in shul. Because these guests are going to be eating and drinking in the Bet Knesset itself. And so, therefore, we make Kiddush in the Bet Knesset itself. I want to make a point here. And the point is that according to Rav and Shmuel, you do have to make Brei Pri Hagafen again at home. And so there's a lot, those people that do say Kiddush at Shul, it's very important to remember that the bracha that the chazan is making is not actually going to be suitable. So it might be a false bracha. So the chazan, when he does this, he has to bear in mind that when he says Brei Pri Hagafen, it's for the kids who are going to drink the wine. And that's why there's a line of kids ready to drink the wine on a Friday night. That's why when I was a kid, we had that minhag, because the chazan was not supposed to drink the wine. It was supposed to be drunk by someone, so it's not bracha levatala. So give it to the kids, because at the end of the day, the kids can drink the wine. So that's the way it goes. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at this Rav and Shmuel, and we're going to see that the halacha is basically like Shmuel, because we're going to see how it goes on through the generations like Shmuel. But we'll come to that now, okay? Before we do that, let's have a look. Shmuel actually is clearly that was his minhag. He's azda Shmuel l'tameh. Shmuel is going according to his own custom. What does that mean that he was going according to his own custom? The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel always used to say, "Ein kiddush ela b'makom suda." He would say, and he was in the first generation, he would say there is no kiddush. You cannot make kiddush except when you're going to be eating. You have to make it at a place when you're about to eat. Okay. Now you might have thought when he says the place you're eating, hanimili mi bayit labayit, you might have thought what he's talking about is you can't make kiddush here at home. You can't after shul pop into someone else's house and make kiddush and then go home and have your meal. That may be what he's talking about. Hanimili mi bayit labayit. You'd have thought that was what he was talking about. But you could make kiddush, say, in the kitchen and then move into the dining room for supper. Maybe what we're trying to see is Shmuel saying that you can't in any way change place, or you just can't change houses. Might have thought it was in any way, but look, the truth is, I've just pressed the wrong button, but never mind. The truth is that if you continue in the Gemara, Amalahu Rav Anan bar Tachlifa. Rav Anan bar Tachlifa was a common guest in Shmuel's house, and in Shmuel's house, he said, "Zimnin segi'in kare hamina kameda Shmuel." I was often in Shmuel's house on Friday night, and what he would do was nachit mi'igra la'ara hadar b'kadesh. So even if he made kiddush upstairs on the roof, right? He might have done it because she was davening on the roof, or whatever reason he made kiddush on the roof. When he came down to eat at the table, he would make kiddush again, which means that Shmuel isn't just talking about going from house to house. He's talking about actually changing place. You have to make kiddush where you're going to eat. It's actually part of the meal. That's part of the kiddush. There's no point making kiddush and then not eating, because it's Shabbos. You got to eat, and so Shabbos is about the food. You really can't make Shabbos without making food. It's really central to the whole day. So much so that if you make kiddush and you don't eat, it's not worth anything. Now, what I pressed earlier is to show you in the second generation, it comes down. Shmuel was the first generation in Bavel. Rav Huna was his prime student who became the Rosh Yeshiva after him. And Rav Huna, he learned the same thing. Ein kiddush ela b'makom suda. He learned from Rav as well, right? But he learned that no, in fact, I'm going to go according to Shmuel, that there's no kiddush except in the place of suda, right? Because there was a famous case about Rav Huna, which happened to Rav Huna Kiddush v'itakra l'shaga. He once made kiddush. He made kiddush once, ready to eat. He's got the food ready, the whole meal's ready. He's ready to make kiddush, and then the candle blew out. Just after he made kiddush, the candle blew out, and he couldn't eat. He couldn't eat in the dark. What was he going to do? So the Rabba Beret. So what he did was he took all his plates and all his vessels, and he went and took them to the house, the marital house of his son Rabba, and he went where there was a candle, the Havashaga, there was a candle there, and it was light. The Kadesh v'Ta'im Midi, and when he went there, then he actually made Kiddush again, and he ate in Rabba's house. Okay, so because he knew that he had to make Kiddush again, even though he'd made Kiddush with the candle in his room. Once the candle went out and he couldn't eat there, he went to Rabba's house, he made Kiddush again before he ate there. Al-Maksava, and therefore we learn, Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Suda. Therefore we learn that in fact it's true that there is no Kiddush except when he's in, there's no Kiddush except where you're actually going to be eating. And even Rabbah himself in the next generation, this is the son of Rav Hund that we just learned about in the story, but even when he became Rosh Hashiva, the generation afterwards, in the third generation, he also said, Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Suda. He also said that there's no Kiddush except in the place of the Suda, okay? And here, Amar Abaya, because Abaya, who was his student and lived with him, he was actually adopted by Rabbah, but that's a different story. Abaya, who was in the generation below, says, Ki havina beimar, when I was at Rabbah's house, when I used to live there, Ki hava mekadesh amarlan, when he would make Kiddush, he would say to us, Ta'imu midi, eat a little bit with me, even if you're going to go home to eat afterwards. After I've made Kiddush, eat a bit here. Why? Until you get home and your guests arrive at your home, your candle might blow out. And if your candle blows out, then you will not be able to make Kiddush at home because you won't be able to eat there. And the Kiddush you're hearing now won't count for anything. Okay? And even the Kiddush you've made here won't count for you because you haven't eaten. So therefore, although you're just popping in, and you're hearing me say Kiddush, eat a little bit with me so that in case something happens, you'll still be able to make Kiddush. Because you cannot make Kiddush except in a place where you're going to eat. Now, there is actually an issue here with Abaya, right? Because Abaya says, this doesn't actually make much sense. Because if you look, Rabbah, if you look at this column that down the middle of the page, right? Rabbah is going according to Rav Huna, who's going according to Shmuel. But he's not going according to Rav. According to Rav, you can make Kiddush in shul. It doesn't have to be at the place of doesn't have to be the place where you're going to be eating. You can make Kiddush somewhere else, in shul or anywhere else, not at the place you're eating. And this is a problem because Abaya has a very, very important rule. He says that everything that Rabbah said, everything that my teacher Rabbah said, all his halachot, he did according to Rav. He didn't do them according to Shmuel. He did them according to Rav. So he would always go on Rav's opinion. Clearly, he's not doing that here, and that's a problem. Abaya says there's only 3 exceptions to this rule. This is a bit of an aside, but there's only 3 exceptions to this rule. A Rabbah would always go according to Rav, except in 3 exceptions, and those exceptions were tzitzit, which means, I'll read out what it says here, matirim mibeged lebeged, where you're allowed to take tzitzit from one cloth to another cloth. So if your tzitzit are getting old, right, they're getting worn, but the strings are okay, you can take the strings off and put them somewhere else. That Rabbah agreed with Shmuel on that one and says you're allowed to do that. That's the first one. Madlikin miner lener. Shmuel said you're allowed to light from one candle to another candle on Hanukkah, something we certainly do not do, and that was Shmuel's opinion, and Rabbah agreed with that. And also, he said Halakha Rabbi Shimon b'Geira. He agreed with Rabbi Shimon about dragging something on Shabbat. You see, the trouble with dragging something on Shabbat is it makes a line in the ground. It's a bit like you're plowing the ground. If you drag a bench on Shabbat, then you're going to make a line in the ground, and that's going to be a bit like plowing. And so they said, so there was an argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon about that. Rabbi Shimon said you are allowed to do it because you didn't intend to make a hole in the ground, and Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't matter what you intend, it's what you actually do, and you've made a hole in the ground, you're plowing, therefore you can't do that on Shabbat. So Rabbah says that the halakha is like Rabbi Shimon in that case. Okay, so here, halakha ke Rabbi Shimon b'Geira. The Tanya, as we've learned, Rabbi Shimon omer gorer adam mita b'kisei v'safsal b'Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon says that you can pull a bench or a chair or a bed on Shabbat, and bilvad shelo yitkaven la'asot charetz, as long as he doesn't intend to be making the ridge that he's making. As long as you're not intending to do it, you're not intending to do it. So Abaya's got a problem here. Why does Rabbah agree with Shmuel? He's usually agreeing with Rav. So how come he's agreeing with Shmuel in this case? And they go, no, you misunderstood. When Abaya says that he agreed with Rabbah, he agrees when Rabbah is being strict. But here he agrees with Rabba is agreeing with Rav when Rav is being strict. But here, Rav's actually being lenient. He's saying that you can make Kiddush in shul. So it says, he would always do the stringencies of Rav, except in these three cases. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't do all of the leniencies of Rav. He wouldn't agree with all the leniencies of Rav. So therefore, we can see that the halakha here, according to whether you can make Kiddush in its place or not, is according to Shmuel, which says you can't make Kiddush except when you're in the place in the place when you are eating as well. Now we've got to the third opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan we're going to deal with very, very quickly. Why did we not deal with it at length? Because as you'll see, it doesn't last long, doesn't stand the test of the halakha. What does Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan says, Af yedei yayin nami yatzu. He also has been allowed to do the yain, which means that once you make Kiddush in shul, you say Brei Priagafen, you say Mekadesh Shabbat, you don't need to do anything at home. You've made Kiddush and you've made the wine. You go home, you can eat the wine. And if that's the case, Rabbi Yochanan, it seems that Rabbi Yochanan is going according to his own opinion, which is his opinion everywhere, where he says, Amar Rabbi Chanin Bar Abaya, Amar Rabbi Padat, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. And we have a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan said this. Echad shinui yain, ve'echad shinui makom, ein tzarich levarech. It doesn't matter. You can change your place, or you can change the wine. You don't need to make a bracha again. What that means is you're drinking wine, okay? Someone brings you a different wine, a better wine, a totally different wine. Rabbi Yochanan says you don't actually need to make another bracha. You can make one bracha of the wine, that's enough. And not only that, but if you get up and move somewhere else, you can drink your wine over there. Again, you do not need to make another bracha over the wine, okay? That's what Rabbi Yochanan's position is everywhere, except there's a problem with Rabbi Yochanan's position, because Rabbi Yochanan, remember, he's not one of the Tanaim. He's not one of the rabbis of the Mishnah. And there's one very strict rule. The rabbis of the Gemara cannot argue with the rabbis of the Mishnah. But we do know, and this is what it says in red. I'm putting this in red because it's something that's said by the rabbis of the Mishnah. And they say something exactly the opposite. They say, Shinui makom tzarich levarech, shinui yain en tzarich levarech. They say that if you change your place, you do need to make a new bracha. But if you change your position, you do not need to make a new bracha. Now, Rabbi Yochanan can't wiggle his way out of this because it's something that the Chachamim have said. And it's exactly the opposite of what he says. He says that you don't need to make a bracha again if you change your place. And they say you do need to change it. You do need to make a bracha when you change your place. He can't get out of it. So therefore, what we say is tiyufta de Rabbi Yochanan tiyufta, and his whole argument is pushed aside because we can't develop from there. There's nothing we can do about that. That's the end of Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. So from this whole sugya, what we've got is that we've got this opinion of this machloket between Rav and Shmuel, which is a decent opinion, decent machloket. Rav might be right, Shmuel might be right. We've seen, if you go through the generations, that Shmuel is where the halacha goes, and so the halacha is brought that you're supposed to make kiddush at home again with your meal and not just rely on it in shul. Okay, moving on. Yativ Rav Idi bar Avin kamei Rav Chista. So there's a whole bunch of rabbis mentioned here, okay? But the bottom line is Rav Chista is saying something in the name of Rav Huna. Here's Rav Huna. Remember, he's the second generation. And Rav Huna is saying something here. Had amrat shinui makom tzarich levarech, lo shanu ela mibayit lebayit, aval mimakom lemakom, no. So Rav Huna is seeming to disagree with Shmuel, which is fine, because Shmuel is not one of the rabbis from the Mishnah. He's a rabbi from the Gemara. And Rav Huna is disagreeing with Shmuel, and he's saying that, no, in fact, when it says that you have to, you have to make a kiddush again, it's not talking about within the same house, like Rabbi Shmuel was saying. Well, Shmuel was saying, no, Rav Huna is saying, in fact, it's only when you are actually changing from house to house. Okay, so shinui mibayit lebayit, then you need to make a new bracha. But shinui makom makom in the same house, lo tzorich levarech, lo tzorich levarech. So what we have here now is an issue with Rav Huna, okay? And we'll carry on reading. It says, Amar le Rav Idi bar Avin, okay? Rav Idi bar Avin, hechi taneina le, b'matnita, debei Rav, henak. In fact, you know what? Rav Huna didn't make any much of a chidush por. It wasn't something new because it's actually written in the Breita that we have written down from Rav Henak. He's a famous Rav Henak. He had a little library and he wrote these these things down, and it says very clearly, it says exactly the same thing in this Mishnah of Rav Heinek. So what's the big chiddush here? What is Rav Huna coming to teach us that we did not already know, right? And it says, "Ve'ela Rav Huna mitnita kamashman." So what's Rav Huna doing? Is he just repeating what anyone could learn if they just go to Rav Heinek and check it up in the library? What's the point of Rav Huna saying that? And it says, no, Rav Huna matnita lo shami'ale. Rav Huna wouldn't have said this if he'd known that it was written in a book. You have no point just repeating stuff. You want to learn, you open the book, you can learn. No, he had never heard this before. So when he said it, even though it was in keeping with what Rav Heinek said, what was written in Rav Heinek's library, nevertheless, he said it because he thought when he said it, it was new and worth repeating. The two, Yativ Rav Chisda. And Rav Chisda also says something. Before he was saying it, Rav Chisda brought Rav Huna's opinion, but now Rav Chisda is talking for himself. Okay, and furthermore, Yativ Rav Chisda v'kama mishmei nafshay. He says it for himself in his own name. Okay, Hada amrat shinui makom tzarich levarech. That when you say that changing place, you need to make a bracha, because lo amran ela b'dvarim she'en tu'nim bracha achreihen bimkoman. This is only for things. Which you need to make a bracha achrona over, which is like there's certain things you need grace before, which is a bracha, and there's some things you need to make grace after meals. Those things, right? The bracha achrona, the grace afterwards, that's for bread. It's for the sheva minim, for the seven produce of Israel. Those are the things you actually have to make a final bracha for. Those are things you can actually fix a meal from. Those are the things that you have to make a bracha if you change place. Aval dvarim she'atu'unim bracha la'achrehen bimkoman ein tzarich levarech. But if you are getting up from somewhere where you're going to make a bracha afterwards, you do not need to make a bracha. You do not need to make a new bracha. My time. Why? Because of course you're going to go back. Clearly, by the fact that you've got to make a bracha back, you're going to go back there. So of course it's not really leaving. Rav Sheshet Amar, echad zeh ve'echad zeh tzarich levarech. Rav Sheshet disagreed with Rav Chisda. Rav Sheshet said, no, in fact, both of these cases, you need to make a bracha again if you leave and come back. Now here, there's another meitaveh. Until now, we're talking about the rabbis of the Gemara, and here, Rav Chisda is in real danger of falling foul of the rabbis of the Mishnah, because we've got a meitaveh. We've got another piece of Gemara of the Mishnah here, which we're going to quote, and I put it in red on the page here. Meitaveh, b'nei chabura hayu masubin lishtot. It's a little story, right? There's a whole bunch of friends, and they were sitting and they were eating, and in the middle of the meal, akru ragleihem, they picked up their feet, letzek likrat chatan or likrat kala. They jumped up and they started doing singing ke'etzad meragdim. They were kind of bringing in the chatan and kala. So they got up from the place where they were eating and they went out to meet the chatan and the kala. Okay, and he says here in this Tanaic piece of work, it's a shehen yotzin, when they go out, ein tonim bracha lemafreya. They do not need to make a bracha when they go out on the spot. Shehen chozrin, ein tonim bracha lachatchala. When they come back, they don't need to make a new bracha when they come back. So it would seem that we should do tshuvta, a big cross for Rav Chisda here, because it seems to be contradicting Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda said, no. If you're eating and you need to go make a bracha, you only need to make a bracha again if it's something that you're going to be fixing you're fixing your food. So here they were clearly fixing their food. So why on earth do they not need to make a bracha again? And they say no, actually you can wriggle out of this one, because as everybody who has ever been to a simcha knows, when everyone jumps up to go to welcome the chatan and kala, there's always someone stuck left at the table. There's always the old man or the middle-aged man in my case, or the ill guy who doesn't get up to meet the chatan v'kala. And that grumpy guy is going to save it for everybody. That guy is going to allow everyone else to come back to the table, and it's as though they never left. Okay? If they hadn't left anybody at the table, if they did not leave anybody there, then they would have to if they did not leave anybody there, then when they left, they'd have had to make a bracha achrona, and when they came back, they'd have had to make a new bracha when they came back. Okay, now the last bit is going to be the beginning of tomorrow, and it says, when it says that they lifted their feet up to go, miklal the dvarim tu'unim bracha. it clearly means that they were dealing with things which do need a bracha la'acharehen, bimkoman askinan, in their place. We're dealing with those particular things. And the only reason why they are allowed to not say a bracha is because they left somebody there. Okay? אין טעונים ברכה למפרע, כשאין חוזרים אין טעונים ברכה לכתחילה. אבל לא הניחו שם זקן וחולה, if they did not leave an old man or an ill man there, כשאין יוצאים טעונים ברכה למפרע, כשאין חוזרים טעונים ברכה לכתחילה. And so therefore you would need to bring something back again. So then there is a problem for Rav Chisda, and we're going to deal with that problem for Rav Chisda tomorrow.